Hello, amazing people, and welcome back to the Ryan Files. Today, you're in for something special. For years, we've been told the same familiar story about ancient Egypt. But what if that story isn't the whole truth? My guest today is Scott Creighton, joining us all the way from Scotland, and trust me, you'll want to hear every word of this episode. He's about to unravel ancient mysteries with compelling evidence, not wild speculation, but insights grounded in real research and critical thinking. What if early researchers made decisions about the nature of the pyramids at Giza that would never allow the real truth to be discovered? That's the question we're exploring today. We're not here to tear down history. We're here to dig deeper and ask the questions that have gone unasked for way too long. Get ready. You're about to see Egypt's ancient history in a whole new light, right here on the Ryan Files. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me this week on the Ryan Files. I'm so excited about this. We have a gentleman from Scotland joining us, the one and only Scott Creighton, who is the author of a number of books about Egypt and the pyramids. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Ryan. It's nice to meet you. Good to be here on your podcast. Looking forward to tonight's show.
Yeah, we're going to have a great time. Something that your name came across from your publisher, and I started looking, and you have a number of books that just immediately, like that, I was like, I would love to talk to this guy. We're talking about the Great Pyramids of Egypt. Now, obviously, in some way, shape, or form, you had to have had an interest at some point in your life that was pretty great, because you've written at least 4 books that I know of about this, and they're all fascinating subjects. Especially, I believe the latest one was the Great Pyramid Void Enigma, Hall of the Ancestors. How did you get started in this interest of, ancient Egypt, the pyramids, all that?
Okay, well, I mean, I think like any youngster at school anywhere in the world, they are taught the standard orthodox line when you're in junior school. And that's basically what happened to me. That's really where the interest began, because when I was taught that at school, junior school, I was fascinated, probably more so than my contemporaries were, more interested in dinosaurs and stuff. But no, I was absolutely fascinated with the ancient Egyptian culture for a long, long time. But as I said, I was taught the standard orthodox line that, these structures were the tombs of the pharaohs. I'm sure that you were probably taught the same thing. But other interests were in relation to Scotland, where I come from, is that the legend of, I was fascinated by the ancient Egyptian legends. And one of those legends was the legend of Princess Scota, or Princess Meritetis, who was the daughter of the pharaoh Akhenaten. And she, during the Amarna period, where Akhenaten banned all the gods, and all the people in Egypt had to worship the Aten disk, the sun disk. So he banned all the religions. There was an uprising. The royal family had to flee. Meritetis, or Princess Scota, fled with her husband, crossed the Mediterranean, I think into Greece, right along the Mediterranean into Spain, crossed from Spain over into Ireland, and then into Scotland. As I said, this is myth, it's legend. We don't know the full facts of this. But I do know that because I was in conversation a number of years back with the secretary of Mohammed Al-Fayed, who basically were in a conversation, an email conversation, where he explained to me that the ancient Egyptians, even today, claim that they discovered Scotland. So, yeah, I was absolutely fascinated. And Al-Fayed had obviously before he died, he has an estate in the Highlands of Scotland at Balnagowan. And he had plans there to build a statue to Princess Scota, and, sort of memorial for her founding of the country of Scotland that was basically named after her. So I was fascinated by all this, these ancient texts and these ancient myths and legend. And but as I got older, you start to learn a bit more. Yeah, you start to look into it a bit deeper. You start to realise that the orthodox narrative doesn't quite add up. You start seeing these anomalies. You're like, I mean, I remember the first big anomaly, Ryan, the very first big anomaly I noticed. And I remember thinking this when I was really young at school, at junior school. And I actually asked my teacher, I must have been a complete pain in the ass, because I would come up with these questions that, but, you too, right? Good. Because, I think authority has to be challenged, but not just for the sake of challenging authority. If you've got a question and you see something and you've got evidence to back up what you're arguing, well, you do that. And so I said, well, why would these kings, if they wanted such a secure burial, in these pyramids, why would they make their pyramids so large? That they could be viewed from miles everywhere. I think the pyramids at Giza, you can see them from about 20 kilometers. I can't remember if it's 20 kilometers or 20 miles, but a pretty big distance away. You can see these. They're absolute monsters. You can see them way in the distance. So anyway, these are the type of questions that would pop into my head, and I think challenging authorities kind of in my blood. When I see something I think's wrong, I don't let it go. I just don't let it go. Especially, I'm not an anarchist. Okay, I'll challenge authority when I feel it needs to be challenged. So that's really what I do with these books. I remember an incident. This was in high school a few years later, and I was in a mathematics class, and the teacher put this question on the board, just this really silly question, and basically said, if any of my students here in the class get this wrong, you don't deserve to be in my class. The question was this: how many zeros and twos are there between 1 and 99? So anyway, we thought, wrote it down, and then he put the answer up on the board a minute or so later. So I was looking at my friend beside me, and I was like, that's not what I've got. He's wrong. I'm saying the teacher's wrong, So anyway, the teacher caught me talking to him, and my goodness, did he give me absolute hell. So anyway, he says, what's your answer? I says, well, sir, I think you're wrong. Oh, really? And why is that, Creighton? You're saying I'm wrong. I says, well, sir, I think you've missed one of the digits, because I think you only counted 22 once. It's not 28, it's 29 zeros and twos between 1 and 99. And the blood just drained from his face. So I'll only challenge, the point I'm making is I only challenge things when I know I'm fairly confident that I'm right. So, and that's basically in my research into Egyptology, that's all I've done all my life, is I see these anomalies and I think, this doesn't make any sense at all. So I try to make sense of it, develop my own theories to try and make sense of ancient Egypt, because as it's come down to is from orthodoxy, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Scott, you're going to fit right in. You're going to fit right in on this program. That's kind of the point. That's kind of the point.
Yeah,
it's like
absolutely, yeah.
Not for the sake of argument's sake. I mean, I don't really care to argue with anyone about anything that, unless it's like an obvious truth or something that I'm very passionate about, then let's talk about it, or at least let's get curious about it. Because if you just sit around on life and you take what everybody else tells you, more than often than not, you're just living in the damp laundry of mediocrity. So that's not what we're doing today. That's not what we're doing today.
Yeah.
So your interest in this peaked at a young age, but like you got into it, and the things that you wanted to challenge, you researched, which I love. You know how many people don't do that. So what's some of the stuff that you got into that hey, hold on a second here, un momento, that you had to kind of dive into and tell us what you found. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the obvious things are, like I just said, why did they build them so large? Why did they suddenly build these pyramids, because they had 4 different types of tombs: underground tombs, rock cut tombs, mastaba tombs. They had all these different types of tombs. They didn't need a pyramid that was so visible from miles in every direction. They just didn't need it. So they started building pyramids and then suddenly stopped building pyramids. So there's this bit in the middle which just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Why do you have, a number of pharaohs building multiple pyramids at the same time, concurrently? They're building these pyramids concurrently. If he's only got one body and one soul, why does he need 4 pyramids? The pharaoh Huni, who was Khufu's grandfather, the pharaoh Huni, he built 7, maybe 8 pyramids. They're all smallish pyramids, but still, he built 8 of these things. Sneferu, Khufu's father, he built 4 pyramids. 3 large ones and a smaller one at Sila. So you're like, this doesn't make sense. He's got one body, one soul. Why do we find sarcophagi that are sealed and have never been disturbed? We find these sarcophagi, and then when we take the lid off them that's never been removed, there's no body in them. So, and there's about 3, 4, 5 of these things that have been found. They've been sealed, perfectly intact, but no body in them. And the other strange thing is, why do we not find any bodies, any kings' mummies from the Old Kingdom period? From the first dynasty to, let's say to Menkaura's time, that's Khufu's grandson. Why don't we find any kings from the Old Kingdom period? We have found from the Middle Kingdom period, literally dozens and dozens of kings. In fact, I think it was Emil Bruce, the German Egyptologist in the 1800s, he found a cache of probably, I think, about 30 or 40 mummified remains. Because during the first intermediate period, central authority had collapsed, and there was a risk that the tombs of the pharaohs would, I didn't say pyramids, I said the tombs of the pharaohs would be ransacked. So what the priesthood did was it took all the bodies and tucked them away in a hidden place, all of them in the one place, and they found these. So we have plenty of these kings from later dynasties, but there's nothing from the Old Kingdom. And that's another mystery. Why? Why is that? What is the purpose of the big void in the Great Pyramid? What is the purpose of the Grand Gallery? Why does the Great Pyramid have 5 chambers for one body? All these questions, they just, they just don't add up. I just, it just doesn't make any sense. At least it doesn't to me. So I had to find a way to rationalize all of this into a cohesive narrative that made much more sense, or at least it made much more sense to me. That's basically what I write about in the books. Now, for me, the real research or the real intrigue for me began when I read another ancient Egyptian legend. I read all the legends, the legend of Skota, the legend of Isis and Osiris. This one is the legend of Surid. This, to me, is absolutely fundamental to understanding the pyramids, is this legend of Surid, or Surid.
Right.
I think it's the same person, but sometimes pronounced differently. So the legend of Surid tells a completely different story for the purpose of the pyramids. And the thing about this legend, Ryan, is that it gets ignored. It gets ignored by mainstream Egyptology because it's just myth. It's just a legend. There's no proof. Well, if we want to go on about proof, well, let's go there. I mean, Egyptology, it's, to me, I believe it's founded on sand. It's founded on sand. It's a lot of assumption built on assumption built on assumption. But when you dig deep into it, there isn't a whole lot of proof for much of what they're saying. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not panning Egyptology because I believe that they have done a lot of good work. I just have to say that right away up front. They've done amazing work. A lot of the scholars over the years have done astounding work. But I believe they took a couple of wrong forks in the road, if I can put it like that. They took a couple of major wrong turns in their understanding of what these monuments were really all about. So,
do you think, let me ask you this too, do you think that those wrong forks, I sit back and I look at the world of Egyptology. This is just me talking to, okay? Certainly not putting this on you or anybody else. Zawi Hawass is going to be on tour in the United States this summer, and I might go out and see him and whatnot. But
man, touring now, yeah.
It's just like, when I don't think you're inaccurate when you're talking about these forks. Maybe you took a little bit of a wrong fork, but as you go down the line, you have to continue down that fork because, and I wonder if sometimes, and I see this in academia all over, it's a matter of pride. Sometimes it's a matter of money and research.
Research grants,
as somebody wanting a certain narrative to be the direction versus maybe the reality. And once you go down that road, everything starts being built upon, sand instead of rock.
Assumptions.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right about that. Now, of course, you get yourself into a lot of trouble in the world of academia when you point out some of this stuff, and it's very frustrating. So I'm interested in hearing exactly where your mind is on that. And I'm not just like you. I'm not, talking bad about the guys. They have done a lot of great things. But I do think that your paradigm needs to evolve with information. There's a lot of new information out there.
I mean, the issue is, I won't go too deeply into this, but the issue mainly are concerned for me is the way that peer review system works in mainstream academia. To me, it's just a way of preserving the status quo. That's essentially what it does. I watched the debate with Graham Hancock and Flint Dibble, and I was just appalled, absolutely appalled at some of the sneaky tricks that Mr. Dibble pulled, but we won't go into that here. But it's there, it's online, you can see it. But, he's just defending the status quo. That's all he's doing. But if you submit a new paper for peer review, it's very difficult to submit a paper for peer review that completely upends the apple cart. You just can't do that. But when you look at the actual evidence that's come down to us, and if you look at it with an open mind, objectively, with little passion, putting the emotion and the passion aside and just trying to look at it in the cold light of day objectively, it's very easy to see that, there's this other narrative that is screaming at us, that is being completely ignored. Even the very name of the Great Pyramid itself speaks to this other narrative, and we'll hopefully maybe come to that later in the podcast. So anyway, the legend of Surid for me is where it began, because that legend tells us, Ryan, it tells us a completely different narrative for the purpose of these pyramids. Basically, King Surid was told by his astronomer, or he had a dream. Now, a dream back in ancient times doesn't necessarily mean a dream. A dream was just, in ancient times, was simply a device to demonstrate the importance of a particular piece of text that was written down as a dream. You know, it was, if it's a dream, then it's godly inspired. You know, so take this serious. That's essentially what the device of a dream was, that when text was passed down as a dream. Listen to this. That's basically what it's meaning. Listen to this. It's important. It's the words from the gods themselves. And in this dream, Surid saw that the stars were changing their course in the heavens, and that the earth had overturned. Now, that may sound absolutely extraordinary, and you can totally understand why it gets dismissed. And hopefully we'll touch on this later. But anyway, you know, so he asked his astronomer priest, okay, guys, what does this mean? You know, the thing is, it wasn't like when they saw the stars and, you know, moving out of place, the earth turning over, it didn't do so in a day or a week or a month. It probably took decades. In other words, it happened geologically in an instant, yeah, but very, very slowly, that, you know, humanity could survive it, you know, relatively intact, although there would be a lot of bad stuff going on around the planet. Anyway, so he asked his astronomer priest, what does this mean? And they said to Surid, it means that in 300 years, a great flood will destroy the entire kingdom. And he says, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to build pyramids. And in these pyramids, we are going to store everything that we will need to ensure that the kingdom can be reborn again after the flood has passed, after the flood waters have abated, you know, lowered. So that's what they did. And here's the key thing as well. And this is where I think Egyptology has gone slightly awry. They kind of got it right, but not right at the same time. Is Khufu said that they would place everything in these monuments, these structures, inside them, beneath them, all around them. You know, these pyramids were built so high that they could be seen from a distance, because survivors could see there's the ark, for want of a better expression. In fact, early Christians, the early Christian church regarded, if you read can't remember his names, the homilies of early Christian church father wrote these homilies about the pyramids, and basically described the pyramids as arcs. And there's these drawings of animals coming out of the pyramids. You know, wow. So even in ancient times, they regarded the pyramids as arcs. So anyway, Surid basically put everything inside, around, underneath these structures. But in one pyramid, and just one pyramid, he said in this legend that he placed his ancestor kings. Now, these are what are known as the Osiris kings. When a king is living, he's a Horus king. When he dies, he becomes an Osiris king. Now, the reason he did this was because an ancient Egyptian king in death was actually probably as important, maybe even more so, more important in death than he was in life. Because in death, his soul could ascend to the heavens, to the stars in the heavens, and could intercede on behalf of the kingdom. The Osiris kings could intercede with the gods in the heavens for the benefit of the living kingdom. That was one of their roles in the afterlife, was to ensure that the Nile would flow, the crops would grow, the sun would glow, the winds would blow. That was their job. in the afterlife was to look after the living kingdom. But if their body, their mummified remains, was destroyed in any way by like a deluge of a great flood and was completely destroyed, then that king could no longer carry out that function. He was basically had a second death, what's called a second death. He died and he was dead forever. He could no longer, his afterlife was over. That was him completely dead. So it was important that they ensured that the mummified remains of their deceased kings, because these were the only ones that could commune with the gods in the afterlife, were perfectly preserved. And it was important to preserve them because when an ancient Egyptian king died, his soul stayed in the tomb with him. But if his soul couldn't recognize the body, it had deteriorated so badly that the soul, his Ka, could no longer recognize the king's body. Once again, he would die permanently. So that's what mummification was all about. It was about preserving the likeness of the king so that his soul could recognize it, so that his soul could live for eternity. Wow. So that's the whole purpose of mummification. So this is what the Surid legend tells us. He placed his ancestor kings inside the Great Pyramid. That's why, Ryan, that's why the Great Pyramid is the only pyramid for all the pyramids that were built in Egypt to have these what are called star shafts. Right. These small tunnels, they're only about 8 inches square, that go all the way out to the outside of the pyramid from the internal chambers. They go all the way to the outside of the pyramid. That's because that's the soul needed access to the skies, so they built it into the Great Pyramid. It's why the Great Pyramid has, and is the only one with these star shafts, or soul shafts. When you look at, now I said that, I didn't say this, well, actually, when an ancient Egyptian king was buried, he was usually buried, or always buried, with a statue. This was called a Ka statue, and its purpose was, quite simply, if the king died and his body decayed so badly that the soul couldn't recognize the physical body or mummy, they used the statue as a surrogate. They placed a statue in the likeness of the king also in the tomb, so that the Ka of the king, the soul, could use the body of the Ka statue, the surrogate body. So in that way, they could keep his afterlife. So there was all this stuff going on. Now in I think it was a Egyptologist, I think he was maybe a physicist as well, André Pochon. He wrote a book in the 1970s, and he went into the legend of the Al-Mamun, who was the Caliph Al-Mamun, who entered the Great Pyramid in about 800 AD, and he saw all these statues inside the Grand Gallery, and they're no longer there. They're obviously removed in antiquity, but there was one statue. There was once many statues inside the Grand Gallery. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Grand Gallery, Ryan, but on either side of the Grand Gallery, there are these two sidewalks, or as we call them, pavements. There's these two sidewalks, and there's these notches cut into the sidewalk. There's about these 27 notches on either side cut into these sidewalks. And the notches are about 2.5 feet wide and about 6 feet deep by a few, so they're fairly substantial. There's larger ones, there's 2.5 feet, and the other one's about 2 feet, maybe slightly less. And what these were the notches because the Grand Gallery sloped like that, and there's inset holes just above the notches. These were to stabilise the statues that were placed inside the Grand Gallery that Al-Mamun and his men saw. Now, what that tells you, Ryan, is that if these weren't just profane statues just to decorate the place, these statues had a function. And it's just exactly what I told you a couple of minutes ago. They were surrogate statues for the body, the mummified body of the king, should it decay too badly. So you have 27 large inset or notches and 27 smaller ones. So you have a king, queen on either side, all the way up the grand gallery. So that's what these notches were for. But what I'm saying is that these represented the cast statues of the kings and queens that are somewhere inside the Great Pyramid, just like Surid told us they're inside the Great Pyramid, and that's where we'll find them, the Big Void. That's why the last book is The Big Void Enigma, the Hall of the Ancestors. Well, the Big Void is the Hall of the Ancestors. That's where they stored them, high as they could get them away from the floodwaters. They got them as high as they possibly could. And there's absolutely no corridors to this thing whatsoever. There's no doors, passageways, corridors, nothing. There's no access to it. So basically what they did with the Big Void is they removed the bodies of the kings and queens from their original burials and placed them when the roof was open. That's when they put them all in. When the roof, they're building a pyramid in layers. So when the roof of the Big Void was open, they lowered the original mummified bodies into the Big Void. And that is why we find that we have these sarcophagi from Khufu's time and before that when opened, they were empty, because they removed the body and then, as a mark of respect, they resealed the empty sarcophagi and, sealed up the chamber, leaving us today puzzling, what's going on here? They had to ensure that the body of the king or the queen was in a safe haven away from the coming deluge that would destroy them. So that's basically, and so what I'm doing is tying up all these little threads. What's the star shafts for? Why are there empty, sarcophagi that are sealed? All this. Why haven't we found any ancient Egyptian kings or queens from this period, but we do from much later periods? Well, I know where they are. And the thing is, when you look as well, Ryan, when you look at the ancient Egyptian king lists. Now, this is what Khufu said. I placed my descendants within the Great Pyramid, his ancestor kings, with their chief queen inside the Great Pyramid. Now, there's 27 notches, so that's 27 kings and 27 queens. Now, you go, Ryan, and you count the number of kings from Khufu's father Snefru all the way back to the first king of the first dynasty. You will find there's 27.
Wow, that's awesome.
So this is what I do. It's kind of like a Sherlock Holmes, but seeing all these different anomalies and trying to piece them all together in a cohesive narrative that doesn't totally dismiss what Egyptologists are saying. Yeah, it was the tomb of Khufu, just not for Khufu. Although I suspect there's a slight part of me that suspects he may be further up and somewhere in the Great Pyramid, but I don't think so. He said he placed his ancestors within the pyramid. That was the reason why it was built. And we have texts from Herodotus that basically say Khufu wasn't placed within the pyramid.
Wow.
So that wasn't his burial. But who knows? So that's my basic theory as to, it's not actually my theory, but it's based on the myth or the legend of Surid. I think there's actually more to that legend than meets the eye. The thing about, the earth overturning, Well, here's the thing, Ryan. There's literally dozens and dozens. I mean, there must be about 60, maybe more legends from all over the world, including writings from Plato, that tell us at specific intervals our Earth overturns by itself naturally. It's basically saying it's part of Earth's natural orbital mechanics. It just does it itself. As as I said, there's all these texts which tell us either implicitly or explicitly that the Earth overturns. North becomes south. There's even a number of ancient Egyptian texts. This one really flummoxes a lot of people, that tell us that the sun. These ancient Egyptian texts, there's about two, maybe three different texts that tell us that the sun once rose in the west and set in the east, and it did so twice. These texts say this quite explicitly. It did it twice in the ancient past. Now, people think, how on earth can the sun rise in the west? Because I'm sure you probably know this. If you turn the Earth upside down, the sun will still rise in the east, just like it does in Australia today, New Zealand. The sun rises in the east, does it just as it does here in the northern hemisphere. So just turning the Earth over won't make the sun rise in the west. So what you'd have to do is stop the Earth and get it rotating the other direction. That's what it kind of implies. No, there's another way to do it, and it is so simple. It's so simple. And it's all to do what Charles Hapgood actually touched on it, although he didn't say this explicitly. But a physicist back in the 1980s, an English physicist called Peter Warlow, was investigating this problem. And he realized, just like what Hapgood was saying, that, if the outer layer, the outer crust of the Earth became free from the inner body of the Earth, that could basically invert itself. That could invert itself, but the actual body of the Earth doesn't invert. So the axis still stays the same, the way it was before. That is how you get a western sunrise. It's just the crust that goes under, but the rotation stays the same. The axis doesn't go with the Earth. And when you do that, you get a western sunrise. Now,
that's interesting. I had a guest on not too long ago, Scott, who talked about that. He was doing some searching for Atlantis. And there's some really bizarre things where the sun came up with the Pillars of Achilles and it was in the west, and then now it's in the east, and so on and so forth. But he talked about the exact same thing about the crust floating on the mantle, basically. And yeah. And that's how all that happened. And you hear about this again, whether or not, believe it or not, to bring in certain theories about stuff, but you hear about the cyclical demise every 3,600 years or so because
civilization.
Because of a alleged rogue solar system with a brown dwarf named Nemesis. You hear about this, and you hear about some of that too in ancient Egypt writing. So it's very fascinating, and I don't take any of that stuff off the table. People are quick to do it.
Yeah, I really, really, really don't think we should, because when you look at the evidence, there's a couple of there's a temple in ancient Egypt called, the Tomb of Senemut, has this amazing astronomical ceiling on the roof of this temple. But here's the really strange thing about it: it's got the stars and the planets reversed. It's got Orion basically following, or Sirius following Orion across the sky in the wrong direction. It's incredible. Everything's reversed. It's the same with the astronomical. I think it's the Ramesseum, the astronomical ceiling in the Ramesseum. Again, the stars and the planets, they're reversed. as if they saw a reversed sky. You see Isis, or who symbolizes the star Sirius, is higher than Osiris, who symbolizes Orion's belt. But when we look at in the northern hemisphere, we look at Orion's belt, Sirius is lower than Orion in the northern hemisphere, but not in the southern hemisphere. Sirius is higher than Orion in the southern hemisphere and is going in the direction that this ceiling shows. So there's all this this material that just keeps getting ignored. The artist had an off day. The artist was drunk. When they drew that ceiling. You're just like, oh, there's all these texts that tell us, literally dozens, about 60 different texts from all over the world: Greenland, China, Europe, South America, North America, everywhere tells us that this event happens, and it happens after a fairly regularish interval. And I researched the star shaft because one of the things I believe that Giza was the goal. It was the plan. There's this other text. It says that the design of the monuments in Giza came from a codex, was placed in a codex which came from the stars in the time of Imhotep, who built the very first pyramid. So I think Imhotep built this plan based on the stars. And the plan he designed, you remember, third dynasty. Plan he designed was Giza. He designed Giza. It took Khufu to actually construct Giza. The ancient Egyptians planned, but they couldn't build it. They hadn't mastered, stonework. Quarrying and moving and constructing in stone. That would take time before they would finally have mastered the skills required to build Giza. And that's what all these early pyramids were all about. It was a training, if you like, for want of a better. Don't get me wrong, those monuments as well as functional, what I call recovery vaults. There would be stuff planned and built inside them, underneath them, so forth. So that's essentially what I believe they had. They had a plan right from the beginning, and it was Khufu that was the person that it fell upon to finally implement this plan. That was probably, this is my speculation, designed by Imhotep within this codex. And that plan was based on Orion, because as well as being a recovery vaults, because the main thing these recovery vaults had to have to store were these kings and their chief queens, because it was only those kings that could ensure it would happen after the deluge had destroyed everything. So it was absolutely, they were the beating heart of the whole recovery system, these Osiris kings within the Great Pyramid. They would place seeds in there, not just inside, but around them as well. You actually see that very clearly at the second pyramid at Giza, the Pyramid of Khafra. The middle pyramid, everybody thinks it's the Great Pyramid, but it's not. Anyway, on the south side of that, there's these galleries, massive galleries, underground galleries, and they're about 100 feet long by about 10 feet, 12 feet wide by about 10 or 12 feet deep. And there's hundreds of them, and it was storage for this calamity that and they were all sealed, they were all paved with, they were all perfectly sealed and built to withstand this coming catastrophe. So they had this plan. Giza was a plan. It was built around, it was conceived around Orion's belt, because what they wanted to do at Giza was not just have recovery vaults for storage, but also a calendar. They used Giza as a calendar using Orion's belt, and it is so clear and so simple. And also the shafts, I would say, inside the Great Pyramid kind of indirectly tell us of this Earth inversion, indirectly point to this Earth inversion. That's what the shafts are actually pointing at. They're pointing at an Earth inversion. You just have to read them the right way. Anyway, so Giza essentially was a calendar. It tells us the cycle of this inversion event. And so that's essentially what the two sets of Queen's pyramids do. It tells us the cycle. Because it's funny, there's so many. I don't think there's any actually before Giza was built. There was no such thing as a Queen's pyramid. Giza is the first place where they appear, these Queen's pyramids. They're not Queen's pyramids. They are what are called processional markers, which basically show Orion's belt at two specific times, past and future, so that kind of idea. But it's all in my book anyway. But that's essentially what Giza is. It's a recovery system. Later, Giza, after it served its purpose, these monuments would become revered. They would become idolized by the population because they worked. Now, can I share a slide with you, Ryan?
Absolutely. This is fascinating. Yes. Oh, okay.
Right. Okay. So what this is the name of the Great Pyramid, which Egyptologists say is well, that's it. So this here is the cartouche of Khufu. Okay. Yeah. So this is Kufu. Kufu. Khufu. Yeah.
Yep.
Now that's actually a shortened version of Khufu's name. His full name is Khnum Khufu. Okay. Khnum was the ancient Egyptian god of the dead. He was the protector of the dead. That's what Khufu's role was.
Okay.
So that says Pyramid Town Akhet Khufu. Okay, that's how Egyptologists read this. Akhet, according to Egyptologists, means horizon. So this is basically the horizon. The Great Pyramid, according to Egyptologists, is the horizon of Khufu. But it's actually nonsense because the ancient Egyptian sign for horizon looks nothing like this. There is another sign, but it looks nothing like this. This is something different. I'm explaining my interpretation of what we're actually seeing here and what it's actually saying. So this here means Akhet. This is Ak with the T, Akhet. So we're reading from right to left and then top to bottom, okay? So Akhet, that means soul of the Ka, okay? That's the soul. This sign here, this is an interesting thing. Egyptologists never actually interpret this sign in this compilation here of Pyramid Town Akhet Khufu. They never interpret this sign. They just leave it out. But what this sign is, you see that down there? Mm. The rectangle sign is a pool or a large body of water. Mm. That's what this sign represents, a large body of water. This down here actually is from the ancient Egyptian Hieroglyphic dictionary. So you can look these up yourself. This sign here, down the bottom here, the circle there with a sort of cross in it, that means town, city, region, kingdom. So basically, and this here is what's known as a determinative. A determinative is like a shorthand summary of all of this here. So the pyramid is a recovery vault for the kings to save their souls from the coming deluge. That's why this determinative here because that's what the pyramid, in my opinion, my view, its function was. It's a recovery vault to ensure the souls of the kings were saved from the coming deluge that would drown, that would be above, that would cover the land, the kingdom. That's what we're seeing here. Yeah. So Khufu is the protector. He is the king who will protect the souls of the Osiris kings from the flood, the deluge, the large body of water that will cover the kingdom. And that's exactly what the function of the pyramid does. That's why it's placed there, not as a tomb per se, but as a recovery vault to ensure the souls of all the ancient Egyptian kings that are in the big void are saved. So that's just to show you that in the very name of the Great Pyramid, Ryan, in the very name of the Great Pyramid, we actually see it talks about the flood. It talks about the very thing that Khufu, the legend of Surid, talks about. It talks about saving the souls of the blessed dead, the Osiris king, from a flood that will drown the entire kingdom. Notice the water there is above the land.
Yep. Wow.
The land is submerged below the water. So that's basically what that slide says. So that was just to kind of give you an idea that in the very name of the pyramid, it talks about the very reason why they're building the thing, to protect these kings' souls.
That's fascinating. That is fascinating. Man, I got a couple questions here I got to get out, though.
Yeah.
So basically, in simplest terms, Imhotep gets this download from wherever and says, hey, this is what we need to do. All right, there's going to be a flood here in however many years, and we need to build this complex at Giza that's going to save, the kingdom. So maybe Imhotep just isn't quite the stonemason that, and the people at that time, so they need to practice. They start practicing. Some of the smaller structures and whatnot are exactly
builds a step pyramid. That's the first pyramid that was built by Imhotep.
Yeah, the
very first pyramid built of stone was built by Imhotep.
How about that? Okay, so you go generation. Next thing you know, Khufu comes around. It's like, I'm the man. I'm the man with the plan, and we're going to do it. Okay, so that I can accept all that. I understand where you're coming from. My biggest question, one of many, is, in your opinion, how were they built? And were they built in the time frame that they said allegedly they were built? I mean, to this day, I still don't know that.
That's one of the great sort of questions of all time, basically, because the truth is, we really don't know how they did it. You've got these 80-ton slabs of granite within the king's chamber and all the relieving chambers above the king's chamber. Massive weights. One part of me says that you could use levers to some extent. You could use counterweights to some extent. In one of my books, actually, again, I read this ancient Egyptian legend that talks about how the ancient Egyptians basically floated the stones in the pyramid into place. Actually, they flew through the air, apparently, if you believe the legend. But it's like these legends. But there's always a kernel of truth in a legend. Always a kernel of truth. Around Giza, you find these shafts. They're quite big. They're maybe about 8 feet square, and they go down about 20, 30 feet, some of them. And basically, they're side by side, these shafts, and there's a small sort of horizontal shaft that connects them below, underneath it. And basically, they're a bit like fire pits, where you start a fire in one, and it sucks the air along the horizontal, the cold air draws down and the fire sucks the air through the horizontal shaft that connects the two verticals. And that type of fire burns really, really hot. And they're kind of all over Giza, and it's another one of these mysteries. What were these for?
Yeah. My
speculation, and it is just speculation. I don't know if you're familiar, Ryan, with the light bulb, the Dendera light bulb theory. Personally, I don't think it's a light bulb, because if you actually are in the temple of Dendera, you actually see this thing. Yeah, it goes like that horizontally, but then you see it vertically, as though it's in the sky, as if it's floating in the sky. And below it, it looks like there's a basket filled with stones. Now, I'm sure you know where I'm going with this.
Sure.
Those Dendera light bulbs, to me, it looked like hot air balloons being inflated. And then, because the text beside these glyphs, these images, talk about the carriers of the sky. And then you see these stones and this other vertical balloon. Well, it's like a basket filled with stones floating up into the air. Now, I just wonder, is it possible that the ancient Egyptians discovered thermodynamics? They invented paper, they invented linen. Those two materials were used to make the first hot air balloon in our time, back in the 1700s with the Montgolfier brothers. They invented the very first hot air balloon out of those very materials. So I just wonder, is it possible that, this legend about them floating the stones up onto the pyramid, maybe that's what these vertical shafts were. This is where they got the fires to raise the temperature high enough for these linen and paper envelopes or balloons to carry these stones. And I did some calculations, about 10, 12 years ago, and it is feasible that the apparatus plus the weight of the stone could actually be raised. So it's a fairly out there theory. Yeah, I get that. I don't deny that. But if you look at this legend that says they floated the stones into place, well, maybe that's the answer. Maybe they did discover thermodynamics. Maybe that does explain the Dendera light bulb, that is some kind of hot air balloon. And you see the snake in the middle of this thing. That's like hot air symbol.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's who knows. But I definitely think it probably took them longer. But if they had enough of these balloons, who knows? They just utilised science and utilised mechanics to the best effect, to leverage mechanics, thermodynamics. Who knows what they could have done if they were able to do that. But I think these granite blocks in the King's Chamber and above the King's Chamber are another level altogether. I mean, I doubt hot air balloons. Well, I suppose you could barrage them together, but I think it would be too difficult. So who knows? To me, it's one of those really, really unanswered questions that I honestly don't think we'll ever know the answer to. But that's great, in my opinion. I think we need to keep some mysteries.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've not heard that particular one, so now I'm like, that's really fascinating. Some of the stuff, the sound you can do, that they're actually now just beginning, I feel like, understanding frequency and whatnot. Yeah, I've been down to South America, Sacsayhuaman and stuff. These megalithic stones that were moved are just, there was a technology that existed that we just don't have today, somehow or another. And we often, I think as a society that we've gotten smarter, and in some ways we have, I guess, maybe just different. But there is a brilliance to ancient cultures that I think it's just It's fascinating.
Yeah. Where are the tools?
Yeah.
Where are the tools?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you see these statues with these perfectly symmetrical faces, made of diorite and basalt,
Very hard.
granite,
Very hard.
some of the hardest materials on the planet, and they're perfectly symmetrical faces. And they're trying to say that they use copper tools or bronze tools to make these things. I really, really I find it really difficult to accept that. If, however, you had a civilization that had maybe iron tools or tungsten tools, even, in antiquity, well, then you're having to go much further back in time to give those tools time to rot away to rust, which would take, I don't know, some 10,000 years. I don't know how long it would take those tools to disappear. But, it's one of the ways to explain the lack of tools is that they've gone to dust, which means the monuments themselves must be much, much older than we actually are told by orthodox Egyptology. So again, that's another enduring mystery. Where are the tools?
Yeah.
And then there's these vases, that you see online now on I think it's Uncharted X YouTube channel, great channel. Ben Uncharted X, he's analysed these ancient vases from museums, and their precision is unmatched by anything that we have created today. And
they weren't turned.
Yeah, well, this is the problem. Sorry, did you say they weren't?
They were not. They were not turned, though.
They were not turned,
yeah.
Exactly, because they've got these lugs. You can't do that in a lathe. You can't not do that on a lathe. How on earth were they able to do that? Yeah. It just defies belief. It really, really does. That is a real mystery. It's so precise, and it has these lugs, so it means it couldn't have been turned on a lathe. It's just, how did they do it? We cannot answer that question. We cannot answer that question. So this tells us there's something more going on to this picture. There's something a lot more going on with the picture. There's something seriously missing from the picture.
Yeah. Okay, so we have these basically arcs. By arc, I'm not talking about something that floated. I'm talking about something that is a vessel to save something.
Yep.
From the Great Deluge, the flood. This stuff after the flood waters receded, is this the stuff that ended up allegedly maybe in the library at Alexandria?
Well, obviously, one of the things we have to imagine that they would try and rescue and save would be their own texts, and scrolls and writings. They would obviously, try and save as much of that as they could, as well as having practical things like different types of seeds and so forth and so on. So, yeah, who knows? There may well be that type of material eventually found its way to Alexandria, but we don't know.
We'll never know.
So yeah. we'll never know, because we know what happened to the library of Alexandria. But one of the things I was going to touch on, Ryan, one of the things that really hacks me off about this Tomb of the Pharaoh narrative that has come down to is that all the pyramids were the tomb of a single pharaoh. Now, that, back in the early 1800s, that wasn't always the case. That wasn't the mainstream thought. People thought the pyramids were for different things. The tomb was one idea at the time, but I don't know if you've heard of the British explorer Colonel Vyse, Colonel Richard William Howard Vyse, who basically found these painted markings inside the pyramid of Khufu, the Great Pyramid. And only that. He found these in 1837 and claims that he found these inside these sealed chambers that he had to use gunpowder to blast his way into. They were sealed, but he blasted into them using gunpowder. Now, there was a chamber below called Davison's Chamber, which was discovered about 60 or 70 years before Vyse, which has always been opened. No quarry marks have ever been found in it or anywhere in the pyramid. The only place quarry marks were found, these painted marks, was inside the Great Pyramid, the chambers that Colonel Vyse opened, blasted his way into. That's the only place where humans can access, I should say, that quarry marks have been found. So, in these chambers, they found these cartouches of Khufu. And this has been deemed as definitive proof that Khufu built the Great Pyramid in the 4th dynasty, 2500 BC. This is a definitive piece of evidence that Egyptology holds up as a definitive proof. These cartouches of the king in these sealed, hidden chambers until Vyse blasted his way in. Now, I've spent the last 10, maybe 12 years investigating this because a number of years ago I came across some letters that basically accused Colonel Vyse of fraud.
Yeah.
One is by an Austrian Hermann von Ludwig von Puckler Muskau. His name's a bit of a mouthful, but he was the first person in 1845 to accuse Colonel Vyse of basically perpetrating a fraud. He actually met Vyse at Giza, and he wrote a book about his travels in Egypt at the time, and inside that book he accuses Vyse of fraud. The next one was in a book that Zechariah Sitchin published in, I think, 1980s. Was the first claim where he made that Colonel Vyse had perpetrated a fraud. In a later book, 1993, I think it was, Journeys to the Mythical Path, I think it is, he was sent this letter by a chap called Walter Allen, who lived in Pennsylvania at the time, and he stated that his great-great-grandfather had worked with Colonel Vyse, and he had family sort of letters.
Wow.
Or he had basically taken notes from family elders that had read these letters from Walter Allen's great-great ancestor, Humphreys Brewer, the chap's name was. Now, Humphreys Brewer basically says in one of these notes that there was an argument between Mr. Raven and Mr. Hill. It's not certain if it was Humphreys Brewer that had the argument, but the way you read it, it sounds like it is, but it may not actually be. And then he goes on to say, faint marks were repainted, some were new. Wow. So he's basically saying, we put marks, or somebody put marks, Hill and Raven painted marks, new marks, inside these chambers. So that kind of got me started on this. And the reason it got me started on this was because if these were fraud, if these markings really were faked by Colonel Vyse, then what he basically did was change history with that fraud, because he basically sent Egyptology, or the antiquarians as they were known back in his day, but all subsequent Egyptologists, down the narrative that the Great Pyramid was built as a single tomb for a single person.
Yeah.
That was the narrative that he created by perpetrating that fraud. Whereas what I'm saying is, no, read what the ancient Egyptians themselves tell us. It was for Khufu's ancestors, all of them, not for Khufu, for his ancestors. That's what this fraud basically did. It solidified that Tomb of Khufu narrative, and Egyptology has never looked back since.
Yeah, that's one of the big arguments right there. That's one of those forks in the road, so to speak, that you talk about.
Yes,
that
absolutely.
If that moment hadn't have happened, the narrative might be different.
Yeah, we might be considering what I propose, that what the ancient Egyptians themselves, which Egyptologists ignore, that he built it for the ancestor kings. The very name of the seal, the name of the pyramid, is Khnum Khufu, protector, of the souls of the blessed dead, the king's souls. They're the only ones that had souls, were the kings, from the deluge that was going to drown the land. It's right there in the name of the pyramid itself. So that narrative basically got sidelined because of what Colonel Weiss did. It was one of the effects. They had their evidence, and that was it. Every pyramid was a tomb of a pharaoh, and that was the end of it. So, which is kind of disappointing. Incidentally, if any of your listeners, Ryan, want to read more about that hoax, they can go to academia.edu. Yeah, just type in my name, Scott Creighton, and quarry marks, Great Pyramid, something like that, and they'll find my paper. It's a 36-page paper, and it absolutely nails every single piece of evidence that actually proves beyond reasonable doubt that a hoax was perpetrated in 1837 by Colonel Weiss. It shows he had the means, the ability, the knowledge, everything, because a lot of people think he wouldn't have had the knowledge. He did, and I prove it in my paper. Let me give you one small example of one of the things I discovered. He got one of his assistants, a guy called Mr. Hill, to make drawings, facsimiles, one-to-one facsimile copies of these markings in these chambers, okay? He asked this guy to do this, and there's 28 of these. He made 28 drawings, and they're all in in fact, I'll share one with you. Is that okay, Ryan? I'll share one of these drawings.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, it's the wrong one. But that one there, actually, that's another one. That there, I call it Schrodinger's stick. I call that Schrodinger's stick. The reason I call it Schrodinger's stick is because, let me see. Should we go back a minute? Yeah. This is Colonel Weiss making a drawing of the same markings, yeah?
Yeah.
There's a stick there. This is it. This is Colonel Weiss's private journal that I managed to discover. Okay, he's written a book about his discovery of these quarry marks in these chambers, and he published the book in 1837. But this is his handwritten notes, his private journal, his field notes, which I managed to discover, and it tells a completely different story to what he writes in his published account. So if I can just find that there, let me see. So you can see down there, this thing here, yeah?
Yep.
That's in this box here, this is it enlarged. So that's what I call Schrodinger's stick, because there Mr. Hill has also drawn it, the big stick, yeah?
Yeah.
But look, that's the chamber today. It's not there.
Yep.
And I had a photographer analyse this photograph. Is from the World Scan Project last year, 2024, and he analysed the photograph, and he basically removed all the other colour, leaving just the red firing, and basically, so any red will show up there. There's absolutely none where there should be. There's no red pixels there whatsoever. And his basically conclusion from this is that there was never any red there all ever. Now, the interesting, it gets worse. Can you see this?
Yep.
So there's Colonel Weiss. There's a stick, yeah, up there. He did this on the 27th of April. Then another one of his guys, he got Mr. Perring to do a small-scale survey, which he did a couple of weeks later. No stick. Yeah, and this guy, Perring, was a qualified engineer stroke surveyor. So he was familiar with doing this kind of work.
Right.
And then a couple of weeks later, Mr. Hill supposedly copies the marking. Remember, these are all supposedly copied from this wall. Yeah, these are all supposed to be copied from this down here, from this wall block. So Colonel Weiss has it, Mr. Perring doesn't, a couple of weeks later. And then it's back a couple of weeks later. And then it's gone again by Alan Rowe when he did his survey. And then the picture today, it was never there in the first place. You know, so what is going on here? Seriously, what is going on here? Now, the one I wanted to show you, the one I wanted to show you was
that stick change the translation?
Sorry?
Would that
stick? Because this is the thing. It shouldn't actually be there.
Right.
It shouldn't actually be there, Ryan, because it's anomalous. It's not part of the cartouches. I'll show you this one here real quick. Right. There's the stick there, okay? And there it's now missing. Okay, so this stick is not part of the king's name. You don't see it in any other glyphs of this type. And there are several. But in this case, it was there, and then for some reason it's now gone, and it's gone from the modern photograph. And it's Mr. Hill drew it, Weiss drew it, nobody else drew it. Nobody else saw it. And it's gone even today. This sign here, and the second one here, this sign here also disappeared. Mr. Perring drew it, and it's now missing. Again, this sign shouldn't be there. It's erroneous. It shouldn't be in this collection of signs. It's like this is actually upside down from all these other signs. It's upside down, and then it's removed. It's like somebody had a change of mind. They were maybe going to draw something else there, started drawing it upside down, changed their mind, got rid of that, and then did this one instead, the right way up. You know, these are only done within, this was done within days of each other, these two drawings.
Wow.
It's there, then it's gone. Then there's another one, this sign here. Again, it's gone. Again, this sign is erroneous. It shouldn't be there. That shouldn't be there. That shouldn't be there. All these signs are erroneous because this sign here is actually in the wrong wall. It should actually be in the opposite wall. There's a reason for that, which I won't go into, but it's in the opposite wall. You know, so it's like it's just crazy what the stuff that they were doing in there. You know, so again, that's erroneous. All these erroneous signs disappeared, all of them. They were there one day and gone the next. Why? Because they were all erroneous. They were false starts. That's what we're looking at there. They were. Yeah. Now, as I said, all this is in. It gives a lot more detail in my. Yeah. Imagine. Yeah. There's 200. There's 200 painted marks in these chambers. These 4 chambers that Weiss discovered opened. There's 200 painted marks. Now, imagine there's 200 cards there, Ryan. They're all jokers, but there's 3 aces somewhere among them. You have to pick out the 3 aces, and you've got 3 guesses to pick out the 3 aces. That's what we're talking about here. You know, it's just impossible. You know, the chances of doing that are just absolutely astronomically low that you would ever succeed in that unless you had inside information or, you know, human agency was somehow involved. And that's so probability of human agency your chances of success of finding these three cards is, there you go, you can see it yourself.
Yep.
Absolutely, virtually impossible. So I'll skip over this. Yeah, this here, this is the last one I'll show you. This sign here is an absolute belter piece of evidence, an absolute killer piece of evidence that those marks in those chambers were faked. And the reason is because this is one of the 28 marks, Ryan, that Mr. Hill, or sheets that Mr. Hill drew. This is his signature here. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
This sheet, or these signs, aren't anywhere in the chambers.
Wow.
There's 2 surveys, and this group of signs aren't among either surveys. Now, it's possible they could have overlooked, but you can see these signs aren't all one-to-one. You can see my wife's hand there. They're not smallish signs. They're fairly obvious signs. There are signs that look like these signs, but they're the wrong orientation, they're the wrong size. Remember, they're one-to-one. They're about half the size of this, and the sign in the middle is completely different. So it's not the same sign, even the ones that look like this. So this sheet is not anywhere in the chambers. So we have to ask, if this wasn't copied from the chambers, where did it come from? And that puts a big question mark on everything in those chambers. So anyway, your listeners can and Google the paper. It's 36 pages. It's got a ton of evidence like that in it, Ryan, that proves conclusively that, or beyond any reasonable doubt, that those markings were faked, and it explains exactly how Colonel Weiss could have done it.
Yeah. Well, that's
very
incredible.
easily.
I want to check that out too, because like I said, that's, at the beginning of this all, you talked about the fork in the road, and
Yeah, this is another one. Yeah,
this could have easily put us down a major wrong fork.
Yeah, I believe it did.
Yeah,
I really believe it did.
Let me ask you just a couple more questions. Real simple here. This the secret Great Void enigma, where you believe that the kings and the queens are in the Great Pyramid, that is inaccessible by chamber. Do you think that we'll ever, in any way, shape, or form, bore a hole or whatever, get a machine in there of some sort to actually explore?
Yep. I've heard rumors that the Scan Pyramid team are doing more high resolution scans, so they might detect shapes within the big void, because what they're seeing just now, you just can't really tell anything of what's inside there at all. But they're talking about increased resolution scans. Maybe that will detect shapes within the void. But I've heard also that I don't have any proof of this, but I've heard in the grapevine that initially Hawass just big void. It's nonsense. There's no void. Now he thoroughly is behind the fact that it is there, and thinks now that I'm sure I heard him in some video say, "Oh, it's the true burial place of Khufu." Blah blah blah. By the way, incidentally, Surid is actually an Arabic word that means Sufis, or could mean Sufis. It's very similar to Sufis, and written in Greek. Surid is a Greek word, and Sufis is also a Greek word, and they're very, very similar. And Sufis is Khufu's Greek name.
Oh.
So Surid and Khufu are essentially the same person. So anyway, back to your question. I've heard through the grapevine that they are potentially going to drill a hole through Campbell's chamber. That's a very, very top chamber. It's got the roof like that. Of the relieving chambers within the Great Pyramid. So this very, very top chamber, I've heard that they could potentially drill a hole through there that could intersect the big void. and get an endoscopic camera in there just to have an initial look around. And then I've heard other ideas about a small drone type thing, a tiny, tiny drone with a tiny camera on it that it can push through and it'll fly about
Oh,
inside the space. So who knows? But I do believe they are working to see what's in there. But I have my quest. I do have my doubts, Ryan, that if they do find all these other kings and queens sarcophagi in there, which I believe are there, they would never reveal that information because that just turns everything on its head. Yeah, yeah,
everything,
totally.
everything blown
Yeah,
up then.
totally. Yeah. So yeah, I think they're working on it.
All right. That's awesome. And what do you think of this
Yeah.
just recently? And I'll make this the last question. Recently, we got all this, outer space, satellite based, I don't know, even know what it is. If it's muon technology, I don't know what it is, but allegedly they found
Yeah.
all these
Yeah.
chambers way below the pyramid, the Great Pyramid.
SAR technology, synthetic aperture radar. Yeah, SAR technology. Yeah.
What do you think of all
So
that?
yeah, well, I always keep an open mind, okay, but not so open that my brain falls out, okay. Um, I like to keep an open mind about these things because these guys um, have apparently used this very same satellite technology to see structures beneath mountains, deep inside mountains that we know are there. So apparently they've successfully done that. So that in itself lends some credence to what it is they're saying. So the thing I would like to happen is for another team, and I believe this is on the way. This is actually now ongoing. Another team is being asked to try and replicate the findings of, Professor or Dr. May and Malanga. So another team, and this is going to cost an awful lot of money to do this, apparently, but apparently it is on the go, and if their findings do replicate those of the first survey, again, it's one of those moments, isn't it? Where
Yeah.
everything just because up in the air, it's like, what's going on? It's just it's like there's just so many mysteries in Egypt when you look at everything there, the tools, all this stuff with the under the Khafre, potentially under the Khafre pyramid. I would love it. I would absolutely love it to be true. I really, really would. Because it would show once again that there's so much more going on that we just don't know about. But I'm not going to hang my hat on it at the moment. I do think it's best to kind of wait and see right now. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. I just talked to a buddy of mine here in the States who's an archaeologist, and he said, yeah, just, pump the brakes, not saying there's anything right or wrong about it, but we're going to have a chance to test this and but yeah, I'm kind of like you. I'm like, man, this would really be fascinating. And if this was to be proven, I know Zahi Hawass, he came out and he just said, no, this can't be true. And I get it. But man, if they duplicate the findings on this, it's like just you can't get the toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I know. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, let's wait and see. It's it'd be absolutely dynamite if it was true, though. If it was confirmed, but absolutely dynamite. And this is the thing. This evidence that are put in the paper that your listeners can see on academia.edu. I've also done a book, incident about it, the Great Pyramid Hoax. They can read that on academia. I've sent that paper to so many Egyptologists, Ryan. Really highly credentialed Egyptologists, and they initially engage in you. Then they initially engaged with you, or some of them did, and then as soon as they saw what they had in their hands, it was radio silence.
Yeah.
I kid you not, every single one was radio silence. They don't want to deal with what I presented them with. They just don't want to deal with it. It's like circling the wagons,
Yeah.
but that evidence alone, blows a big hole in Egyptology's key piece of evidence that this pyramid was Khufu's. I personally believe it probably was Khufu's, but just not in the fourth dynasty, because there's other reasons why I don't think it was the fourth dynasty. I think they're older. I think they're much older. Much older. I think there may have been, I've always said this in the past, the reference that we find, these painted marks that we find on these stones, they seem to come from later times in Egyptian dynasties. The style of the writing appears to be different style. So that it seems to be harking back to the king that did build the monuments. But just like today, we will write, Bibles about Jesus Christ today, who lived 2,000 years ago. A similar thing with all these inscriptions. One of them, I think it's called, that they found is called Followers of Khufu. Followers of Khufu. But that could be just like somebody writing today saying, I'm a follower of Christ.
Yeah. Yeah.
That phrase, follower of Khufu, could be meaning Khufu who lived, 2, 4, 10,000 years before. Who knows?
Yeah.
But he's a follower of Khufu, making that that particular piece of text. So that's what I think probably happened. There's other explanations. There may have been repairs being done in dynastic times by, the people of that time in reverence to Khufu who lived earlier. There may have been a king in the fourth dynasty that called himself after the original Khufu. So there's all these possibilities.
Yep.
But those marks are fake.
There you go. Isn't it great? Isn't it great? Just, man, I love the fact that we live in a universe where there's stuff to try to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can't solve everything. I say that because I don't think we should solve everything. I think we should still have some mystery in our lives. It's all interesting.
The romance of a mystery is a beautiful
absolutely
thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this has been awesome. Obviously, academia.edu. Look for Scott Creighton there for your 36, I think you said, page paper on all this stuff about Vice. Yeah. And then where else can people get a hold of you?
Mainly the quarry marks. That's mainly about the quarry mark.
Yeah. Where else can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, they can. Well, I tend to keep a low profile. Ryan, this is the first interview I think I've done in about 3 years, maybe 3 years, and I'm not planning to do any other interviews anytime soon. I do have a website. I used to have YouTube videos, but I've taken them all down. It was just too much, just trying to keep track of everything. These days I tend to keep a low profile, but yeah, my books are out there. The Inner Traditions, or you could buy them from Inner Traditions, or from Please Support Your Local Bookstore. Even if they're not in store, you can order a copy through your local bookstore. Support your local bookstore, there's Amazon, so forth and so on. So yeah, Scott Creighton, you'll find all my books there. So yeah.
Yeah, get your book on. If you don't mind, I know The Great Period, The Void Enigma, you got 3 other books, The Great Hoax and the 2 others. If you don't mind, I'm going to add them to my fun little deep dive book club here at the Ryan Files, just so that people, whenever they want a good read, they can go on the list and check out your books, if that's okay.
I appreciate that, Ryan. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Awesome, man. Hey, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you coming on. I know you're in Scotland. I'm over here in the States, and it's probably getting close to the bedtime over that way. So
it's 8 o'clock now. So well, not quite yet. I'll have my dinner, watch some TV, maybe do some research. I'm researching another book just now, but I don't know when it'll be finished. It's pretty much put to bed now, but I like to go through and just keep refining things. So yeah.
Hey, listen, when you're ready for it to come out, if you want to go and promote it anywhere, please get in touch with me. I'd love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate you, Scott. Fascinating stuff, and I know my viewers are going to love it. You're awesome. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Good. Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
From Scotland, the one and only Scott Creighton. Thank you. Wow, I told you Scott Creighton would change how you see Egypt forever. If this conversation sparked your curiosity, let me know what you think in the comments below. I love to hear your thoughts. And if you want even more, don't miss the Aftermath episode, a relaxed behind-the-scenes conversation where Scott and I keep the discussion going, even chatting about grabbing a pint someday in Scotland. It's available exclusively for agents of the Ryan Files on Patreon. Think of it as the conversation after the conversation. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the Ryan Files. We're bringing you the deep dives others won't touch. Hit that like button, share this episode, and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. For even more, visit theryanfiles.com, your headquarters for hidden history, new discoveries, and all things The Ryan Files. And become a channel member right here on YouTube. Unlock early access, bonus episodes, custom badges, and join a growing community of curious minds. And don't forget, Scott's books are available now at intertraditions.com, your favorite bookstore, or Amazon. Big thanks to Intertraditions for helping make this conversation possible. Thanks for being here. Be amazing, stay positive, and stay curious out there, my friends, and I'll see you right here next time on The Ryan Files.
Are you not curious?
Preparing to transfer the Ryan Files. Now.
I present to you, with great intrigue and wonder, the Ryan Files.